Hey, what are you doing here?
We had to drive backwards because some schmuck stole the VCR from the common room.
Public Enemy. It's a great movie.
For a class, just finished. We're out of here.
40 grand a year to watch old movies?
40 grand a year to watch old movies, indeed. Welcome back to Cut to Black. It feels like it's been so long. Jacob Burrows, that is your quick little teaser preview of Sopranos season 3 for you.
Yeah, wow, that was like a glimpse of the future. I got to glimpse Meadow. She's even older now. Oh, how weird. And indeed, 40 grand, who would pay that when you can watch old movies for free on Shows What You Know, aka Cut to Black, a Sopranos sit down. And it does feel like it's been forever because for you, our dear listener, oh, it's been seamless. Episode after episode, they just appear on the feed. For us, we've had to take a bit of a break, and I'm really glad we could do it like between seasons because we could take a break. Now we're doing The Public Enemy, in case you didn't know, and then we're going to get back into season 3 next week. Jim, how are you feeling?
I am feeling good. Now, if you're new to this podcast, we do discuss every episode of The Sopranos, or we're in the midst of it. I have seen every episode. Jacob Burrows is on his first watch through, and yes, in between seasons, we take a small little exit ramp off the New Jersey Turnpike, where we watch something in the gangster / genre, what have you, that is related to Sopranos. And for people that are in the know, The Public Enemy does play prominent in one of the episodes of season 3, which we will eventually get to. But for now, we're talking just the picture here. Now, this is a 1931 talkie, as they say, directed by William Wellman, written by, let me see here, who wrote it? John Bright, Kubik Glassman, and screen adaptation by Harvey Thu. Now, this is kind of now I haven't watched any of these classic gangster movies, if I'm being honest here. I've never watched like the original Scarface. I've never watched Little Caesar. Some of these other James Cagney movies. So this was kind of a revelation for me. It was kind of interesting to go back and see how the gangster film really, like, the basics are there from the beginning.
Yeah, I was gonna say it hasn't changed at all. Like when you go into these old movies, I mean, it's a really old one. Like it's just like, imagine now, like how many years has it been since like Avengers came out? Like, we're recording this in 2018. It's been a lot of years since Avengers came out. Like, that amount of time back then, it's like, oh, movies, you couldn't talk in a movie, and then like they're making this. And not to say that it's the hugest cinematic masterpiece ever, but like you said, the pieces are all there already on the board, and they got the gangster story down basically.
Yes, yeah, and this is even like, I don't know a lot of my film history, which kind of shame on me, at least from this time frame, because when I was reading a bit up on it, a lot of people are talking about the Hays Code, or the Motion Picture Production Code, and this is kind of pre the Hays Code, or was like the Hays Code was being written and brought up, but it wasn't fully enforced till 1934, and that was kind of more like limiting violence and sex and drugs, and of course a lot of like interracial sex relationships could not be shown, or children's sex organs, which I guess is still a thing.
Well, yeah, that one's all right. We're fine with that still. Still haven't lifted the ban on that one.
Although willful offense to any nation, race, or creed. I mean, that's kind of interesting. They're kind of that, in addition to white slavery. But this is pre-code, so I guess it did get away with a lot more than some of the movies, even a few years later.
Yeah, much like the early days of the internet, it was a Wild West before and they made some Westerns incidentally, but it was a Wild West before they clamped down and made everything controlled. And yeah, you think there might be freedom here on the internet, but it's all part of the machine, man. And they made Hollywood part of the machine by censoring everything. This was also the time, like I had to look up as well, even though I have watched Boardwalk Empire. Didn't watch the last season, but I've watched Boardwalk Empire, and Prohibition and all that is a big part of this film. And I still had to look it up, and like, it's not like they're making a retrospective. Prohibition was still going on when they put this out,
Yes, I mean, and that's why it is great how the movie starts and ends with like this disclaimer
Yeah.
basically of these types of people, they're actually, let me see
They're
if,
rotten to the core.
yeah, like,
Watch out, ladies and gentlemen, for men like this. And then, like, showing how badass it is for like an hour and 15 minutes. And then, like, don't do that. Like,
yeah, it is the ambition of the authors of The Public Enemy to honestly depict the environment that exists today in a certain strata of American life, rather than glorify the hoodlum or the criminal. Well, the story of The Public Enemy is essentially a true story. All names and characters appearing herein are fictional. And yeah, let me pull up what was the end. The end one was even another, like, it really was, the whole movie was like, this guy's cool, he's great. I mean, he does meet a tragic ending, but they still have to be like, I know that looked cool, but this is not how you want to live. Uh, Let me just find it real fast.
yeah, which, that also is weirdly familiar with, I don't know, video games or whatever, where it's like, you just throw a little on there of like, well, yeah, but don't actually be a gangster though, because, it'll be bad, but it's still cool. And that part definitely relates to The Sopranos. I'm going to try to make some connections here. Definitely relates to The Sopranos and how, like, every character thinks Tony's hella cool, but they're afraid of him. Like, they despise him, but they respect him. And everyone wants to be connected to the mob one way or another, because it's hella cool, but also dirty, but so cool in the movies. And at the same time, this is like one of the movies, not on its own, but like it's one of the movies solidifying the myth of what a gangster was. Because maybe, I don't know, maybe there were like paperbacks, like Penny Dreadfuls about gangsters or whatever, but much like the Western, it's like this is when they're setting the myth into stone or into film.
Well, and especially like you said, because it's like they're talking about things that are just happening now. Well, not now, but in the time that the movie was made. So yeah, I'm sure there were books about gangsters, or like cowboys were a type of gangster if they were a dark cowboy or a dark Jedi. But this was for the time. This is just things happening, outside your window. The end of Tom Powers is the end of every hoodlum. The Public Enemy is not a man, nor is it a character. It is a problem that sooner or later we, the public, must solve.
Right.
And yeah, to relate it back to The Sopranos, now David Chase does reference The Public Enemy as one of the first gangster movies he ever saw, and like a big influence on The Sopranos. And I mean, clearly Junior's pie in the face is the grapefruit in the face. The famous scene from this movie where he shoves a grapefruit in his girlfriend's face because he's like annoyed with her. And I guess at the time it did bring out women's groups were protesting at this violence that was happening to this actress.
Right. Yeah, that's something I didn't react to in the movie, except I did react like, that was fucking weird. And then you go to the Wikipedia, there's a whole section about the grapefruit scene and was it planned, was it not planned? By the way, we're hoping that you've watched The Public Enemy if you're tuning into this. If not, it's okay. We're going to go through it. It's a gangster movie. It's pretty much about what you expect it's about. We may go into some details, but yeah, the grapefruit scene is probably the most important detail of all.
Yeah, I mean, even if you haven't seen it, you've seen The Sopranos, you've seen Uncle Junior in season 1 when he pushes the lemon meringue pie in his girlfriend's face. It's basically a nice homage to that. And yeah, the big discussion is some people say it was planned. Other people say that they were both in on it. Yeah, Mae Clark and James Cagney were the actors, obviously. Supposedly, she was in on it and that it was only going to be a goof for the crew. But then other people say no, the director, not the director, or one of the writers, basically, like, his wife would eat a grapefruit every morning and he always wanted to shove it in her face.
Yeah, and it's like that. He went.
Yeah.
And he went to the movies. The myth says he went to the movies every day, and then he knew the exact time that scene would happen and went in and imagined, or maybe no, it was the actress's ex-husband, right?
Yeah, at first it went that the director said that he added the grapefruit hitting scene because he and his wife at time would get into fights and she would never talk or give an expression. And she always had a grapefruit for breakfast, and he always wanted to put the grapefruit in her face just to get a reaction. so she would show some emotion. He felt that the scene gave him the opportunity to rid himself of that temptation. And yes, James Cagney, according to him, the legend goes, is that Mae Clark's ex-husband, yes, had timed out the scene where he would buy a ticket and just go into the theater to watch his ex-wife get a grapefruit stuffed in her face, and then he would leave and come back later to watch it again.
There's no way that's true, but I just love that he made that up because it's like such a good story. And yeah, indeed, this is the most important part of the movie. So we'll be spending about 80-90% of the podcast discussing the grapefruit scene.
And actually, one of the kind of, I mean, it's a part of the movie, but it's not a big part of the movie. Watching it, but only knowing of it through the realm of Sopranos originally, because what David Chase talks about is that he thought about this movie because he remembers the mother in the movie and how sweet she was to her son. And it was the very opposite of how Livia Soprano was to Tony.
Yeah.
And he thought about how that, I mean, this is getting into, I mean, it's not really spoilers. It's just there's an episode where Tony kind of digs into this movie a little bit here and there. And, you know, David Chase thought a lot about how that would affect Tony, because his relationship with his mother, and it's the opposite. And it is interesting how it plays through this film, because she's all like, it's clear that Tommy is her favorite, because we have the two brothers. We have Tommy and Mike, and Tommy is just the brash gangster who kind of looks down on his brother for being like, getting a legit job, going to night school, enlisting in the army, like doing all the stuff you're supposed to do.
He's learning how to be poor.
Yeah, exactly. He always has comments about it. But then it's weird because they never really have the Michael character react to the fact that he's clearly not the favorite in his mother's eyes. And I guess maybe if you read between the lines, not that I don't know if the subtext, I mean, the subtext is there that maybe that's why he's doing all these things right, that he is trying to be the perfect son because he's trying to live up to his mother in his mother's eyes, to show that he's just as good or something. I mean, I could be throwing that in where it's not really there on the screen, but you could pick it up from the characters, I suppose.
Yeah, we also have the influence of the father, who's really only seen, if I remember right, in the beginning, because we start out with these characters as kids.
Yes.
Our main character, Tommy, does something bad, steals some roller skates for Matt's sister, or whatever it was he's being punished for, and gets punished for it. And I'm sure that influenced Tommy to go one way and his brother to go the other way, basically.
Yes, and that's another piece of this movie I was kind of surprised with, because it's such a great part of not every gangster movie, but a lot of them, whether it be that we start with these characters as children and seeing them kind of dance with the idea of being like a hoodlum or a criminal, and then how that grows, or we at least get a flashback. Because I mean, even in the realm of Sopranos, we do get to see Tony as a young kid. And it was interesting to me to see that even in this movie from the 30s, they play with that, and we get to see him as kids, and then it's kind of how it grows into being, you know, a gangster, basically.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm being honest, when the film started, I was a little worried, just because it like starts with a shaky pan, like they couldn't pan right. I guess the cameras were like, 20 pounds or whatever or more. So there's that, and then there's these kid actors who are sort of playing their roles kind of like Little House on the Prairie style, and you watch out, Tommy, you gonna get what's coming to you one day. And little did he know how true that was. But yeah, as we progress into them growing up, they're still hanging out with this character Putty Nose. I also love the nicknames. And Nails Nathan is another great one. But yeah, hanging out with Putty Nose and stealing stuff from when they were kids, and then they start growing up and grow past him. It's like you said, seeing the evolution of it makes it a lot more interesting than just having like, this is the cool gangster character. Yeah. That's almost the case in every gangster movie, because you're always like entering the world of being a gangster and reaching for what you wanted, and then seeing like, oh, what I wanted came with a price. It's like basic story structure stuff, but it works.
Yeah. Well, I was actually surprised with like some of the action in the beginning when they are kids. Like there's like a chase scene kind of, and then they're sliding down
That's
the
true.
stairs and stuff. Like, I guess it's because I have such like no real respect for old. I just assume all old movies are just a camera stationary and then people just talking into the camera, like looking straight into it or something. Because I was
Running
actually,
back and forth.
yeah, I was actually kind of impressed with some of like the camera moves in the start and some of the
Mm.
action that they got right into. Like skipping around a bit, reading up on it because there are scenes. There's scenes where they're shooting guns, but then people are acting like they're being shot, but clearly it's not like they have squibs or anything. It's
Yeah.
just the same thing you would do, you know, when you're like 12 making a YouTube video or something and you're like, bullets and nothing, but you're just acting bullets are hitting you. But then in the next scene, Cagney's looking around a corner and then he runs and then the gunshots hit the corner and it blows up.
Yeah.
And I was reading that they just used live rounds. They just started shooting the wall after he like he's peeking around the corner and then he runs away and then they just shoot the wall with live rounds. That's why it looks like it's being shot with fucking live rounds.
Yeah. So what you're describing of like old movies being just a stationary camera and running back and forth, like that's what I think of like early 1900s movies where usually there wasn't talking. But my thinking with these movies is more like they had it's such a weird balance of budget because like I said, it was a Wild West. Like no one had made movies before. Like imagine that, because they were inventing this whole new language. And one thing I also think of is with the Hollywood system, it's like we have crazy weird budgets. Like we have an insane amount of people in this shot because guess what? People are cheap. It's a recession. We get a bunch of fucking like how an enormous amount, like a crowd or whatever, and we do all sorts of camera movements and we spend lots of time on it. Like because it paid off too. Like it was big business. Kind of similar to how it is now, I guess, where movies are moving more towards like big productions that need to pay off.
Yeah, and David Chase also has another quote from him. Public Enemy was the movie that started my love affair with the gangster movie. It really scared me, especially at the end when Cagney falls through the door all wrapped up like a mummy. And yeah, I mean, I guess we're jumping around a bit, but I feel like it's a really effective ending. And again, I guess it's just my low expectations on, you know, what, like an 80-year-old movie or, you know, almost
Yeah.
year old movie is I just assume they're not doing interesting things. But even before that, when, you know, there's a shot of Cagney in the pouring rain and he's like staring down like his enemies,
Yeah.
like sock hop or meetup or whatever it is. I mean, given his plan's not great, he just kind of goes in with two guns ablazing, just ready to fire on everyone in there. And obviously, I mean, they don't show this big shootout, but they do some interesting stuff where, you know, you're playing with the sound and stuff off camera, and then he kind of stumbles out shot, and he has the quote, "What, I ain't so tough," as he falls into the rain and gets taken to the hospital.
Yeah.
I don't know. I ended up, again, I think it's just because I was like, oh shit, old movie, here we go. But I was really impressed with some of the, like you said, they're inventing filmmaking and they're doing some interesting things kind of right off the bat in a weird way. Even stuff like, you know, the brother comes home from the war, and Tommy at this point is kind of nice baron. And again, it's like these Tommy and his friend, why am I not, I'm spacing on his friend,
Matt,
right?
maybe?
Yeah, they never, it's not like they're about these capos. They're just these guys that beat up people and they do good work for money. They're kind of still just a little bit above street hoodlums.
Yeah.
But even at the point he comes home and then Tommy has to bring out the big keg and put it on the table. And it's just a nice visual thing that this thing's in the way of the family.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, it's like a family dinner. And of course, Sopranos, everything is always around, you know, eating and dinner and food and all that. So it's just nice, thoughtful things they're doing when they are just flying by the seat of their pants.
You're right, and they're like I want to clarify. My trepidation was mostly squashed as we moved more towards like present day and stuff. It was just like I had the same sort of worry at the start of like, oh, old movie. You know, if you've taken any sort of film course, you've watched a lot of old movies. Not all of them are gangster movies, and sometimes you get worried. But like there's still hints of that sort of thing though, like with the brother, the way he talks, you know, it's very specific old movie way of talking.
Oh,
Like, now you see us, huh? You're not gonna do that, and it's like, and then Tommy's like, I'm a great actor, so I'm just gonna act like a normal person would, but kind of a crazy person. And then he's like, oh, you shan't be doing like that over here. Oh, take this out of here immediately. I slap you. So yeah.
Well, and even supposedly the other legend is that when Mike punches him, the director told him to really hit him, and it broke his tooth, and that's why. Like, I mean, I don't know what scene they're talking about. I assume it's the one when it seems melodramatic because he falls through a table.
Yes.
Gets punched. But because there are punches later on when it's just more like you throw a punch and the person just moves their head and they're like, whatever, I'll punch you right back. But that one, it seems, although it seems the fakest because it just falls through a table and then he gets up and continues the scene. But I assume that's the one where potentially it was the real shot and it broke Cagney's tooth. But he continued the scene because he's a professional.
Yeah, I'm having a look at it now. It does look a bit more real than it might be. It could be some truth to it. But of course, consummate professional. He doesn't break. Carries on with the scene. Super melodramatic with the chair, like you said. But yeah. So
well,
so
and
this movie, man.
one moment too. I mean, and I didn't really look into this, but I'm just checking really quick because not to go off on a different show, but the scene when they're robbing the like brewery, it was very reminiscent of Breaking Bad in the train thing.
Yeah.
They're like running the pipe and they're like pulling the booze out from the factory into like the gasoline truck or whatever and driving away with it.
Mm-hmm.
Let me double check real quick.
Yeah, it does remind me of that. And I also like the scenes where they're showing society changing, like the scene where a like florist van pulls up to a liquor store and then like they throw all the flowers away because everyone's got to buy all the booze by midnight. Those are all also really great as far as setting the tone a bit wider than just the characters and their personal stories.
And one other thing, and it was weirdly expected and over the top, but also in a weird way, what I assume for the time kind of accepted, is when he's getting fitted for a suit and the tailor is clearly a gay guy because he made some comment about like his muscles or whatever. But I guess I appreciate that it's not like Tommy was like disgusted. It was like, I'm not getting my suit made here. It was just kind of like, you know, I'll show you what these muscles are for. Like, don't make comments like that. It was such a bizarre, like, I guess weird offhand joke, but then also like, he's a gay guy. He does what he does. It's the 30s. Who am I to judge? I'm a booze baron. So,
well, you know, the best part or the most memorable part of the scene is, of course, the guy whose whole acting career was probably just reading these numbers, 17.5 inches. And then he just mentions, like, did you hear? Just carefully planting some information for us, the viewer. The tailor says, did you read what it said in the papers? 150,000? And then he repeats 150,000 as well. That's good comedy, man.
Well, and I guess that's another thing kind of tied to Sopranos, because even though this movie is, I mean, from the disclaimers we read, they are trying to be like, oh, no, this is not the way to live, and this is a problem for the public, and we need to do something about this. They're still not afraid to have these small comedic moments with, you know, these anti-heroes that they would have. And you would almost assume at first glance of being like, I'm from the modern age. People back in the 30s didn't know shit. But they are, you know, having a little fun with some of these characters. And of course, Sopranos is ripe with comedy and they handle it really well. I feel like it's kind of like another connection you would see there. And I mean, it's probably wasn't meant to be a goof, but I love the scene. And again, this is another Sopranos connection to me. Not before getting to the scene is we have this gangland war building because you know, Tommy's working for Nails Nathan, and they're going in busting heads if people don't want to buy their booze. And then Nails gets killed, but not in a gang fight. He gets killed by his horse. He gets kicked in the head.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a Sopranos thing where it's not it's not the mob stuff that comes in and changes everything and causes all the drama to hit. It's just a random act of life. And because we do see that Nails like likes horses. Like there's like a scene earlier, I think, when he's either with a horse or something or other. And now we find out that he gets killed. And this opens up this vacuum and builds up this gang war. And to me, it's hilarious that they go to the stable and they buy the horse and they put 2 bullets in it.
I mean, it really shows sort of the decadence of violence that they've gotten to, where that makes perfect sense to them. Like, they can't take it as a random act of life, as you said. They're in a world of retaliation, and this is how you solve problems. And, I mean, it's hilarious, but it also totally fits their weird worldview that they've gone into, where it's like, well, yeah, we're gonna take that. Like, it's not. They I don't even. Well, maybe they enjoyed it. I don't know. But it's like the code. We gotta take that horse out, man. And if that was a whole other movie where it was just like trying to assassinate a horse, I would also watch that movie.
And again, this isn't spoilers, but it's touching on things we haven't seen yet. I don't know if it's for sure a reference to this film, but horses do play an important part later on in Sopranos, as we'll see as we go through the episodes. I mean, because we already know Tony has a thing with animals with the ducks. I'll just say horses play an important part. So I would say it's very reminiscent of this movie. And I mean, of course, The Godfather. I mean, there's a famous scene with the horse head in the bed. So we could trace it all back here to the Public Enemy. When they get revenge on that horse that did in Nails Nathan.
Yeah, and in The Godfather, they remixed it a bit, and they were like, how about instead of taking revenge on the horse, we do it? Well, I guess they kind of did as well. I guess, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And if they are going to do big horse things in The Sopranos, I imagine that Hesh will be involved, because there has right? Because there's already been a scene of him like looking at horses.
He has like a stable or something, I believe.
Yeah.
And they've been there and had their like therapy where neither of them listen to each other.
Yeah.
Just a couple of call outs, just a couple of random things I made notes on. Like first, their friend Larry dies during one of their big heists. And they go to the funeral and like, his family, obviously they're crying at his funeral, but then they cut to like a side room and the cops are there. Like the cops are at the funeral and they're like, that's what he gets. See, you shouldn't have been out there. And it was hilarious to me that they went there to kind of rub it in a weird way, to just be like, I mean, obviously it was probably just easier to be like, all right, we'll just film this all together and we could show that the cops think it's no big deal because they killed this guy for being being a thief. And I like the way that scene played out, the heist where like they're trying to steal some fur coats and they pull it off and there's like a bear statue or something underneath and he gets scared. So he starts shooting it in the face.
Yep.
And that sets up they get kind of backstabbed in a way by is that Putty, I believe?
That's Putty knows, and it's like, what he did, was it even that bad? Like he went on the lam because you guys fucked up, kind of.
Yeah.
So
and again, like kind of going back to like having vision without these days it's common to be like, oh, this is an homage to the scene from The Godfather, and it's like, we did the camera move from 2001 A Space Odyssey as an homage. But when they're making The Public Enemy, they don't have a lot to go on, but it's really artfully done when Putty gets killed, because it's like, and the way it plays out where he's begging, I keep spacing on Tommy's friend
Matt.
The cast real quick. Yeah, Matt. And then it kind of goes to him trying to play, like, remember the song when you were kids? I'd play the song all the time. And it's such a classic, over dramatic mob hit type scene, because it's like someone at a piano and then someone behind them with a gun, but then they can kind of pan away and play it off screen. But again, it's just stuff that I was impressed with, mostly because I had low expectations. But it's just interesting to see those things still playing out in gangster films now. Just different variations. Obviously, we could do a lot more, and especially with the violence, you can do a lot more these days with effects. But it's the same spirit that they were kicking back in The Public Enemy.
Yeah, and honestly, if you want to like get like, there's a reason they show this stuff when you go to one of these film courses or whatever,
Yeah,
because you're gonna notice it. When we're watching something right now, we so often don't notice what's going on in the visual storytelling, and that's why we do a podcast to discuss it. And like, I could have watched Sopranos in 2 weeks, all of it, but we're not doing that. We're doing this because we want to like get more aware of like these tips and tricks that you can use in your own creativity. And I think it's really helpful to look at these old ones because uh, you're going to notice it more when they do stuff like that. And like you said, they're doing it off the cuff. Like this was something that was quickly developing as it was happening. I mean, yeah, the films had been around for a fair while, but they were changing at a rapid pace. Not to say that they're not doing that now too, but like you said, like panning away, there's visual stuff going on, especially the beer keg you mentioned. Like, there's some shot where Putty Nose is gonna shoot at billiards or pool, and he's just leaning back, and his ass kind of gets all in Tommy's face, showing he doesn't really like respect him. But it's also just visually funny as well. So that's definitely a reason to watch these things and relate them to more modern stuff like, The Sopranos.
absolutely. And some of the other like trivia on this movie is that Edward Woods, who played Matt, was originally hired for the lead role of Tommy, and Cagney was supposed to play Matt Doyle. But then the director, once he got to get to know both of them, did the old switcheroo.
Hmm.
And it's just another interesting thing, and you got to wonder how that plays out when you're the other guy, and you're like, oh wait, but I'm Tom Powers. That's the funner role, I get to be the lead, and I get to push grapefruits in women's faces and be the cool guy. Get to do the cool gun scenes and kill other people and shit.
Yeah, and this was round about James Cagney's like third film, or I don't know, something like that. Or maybe that's not completely accurate, but as far as his filmography that I've got pulled up, he's been in like a million movies. It was one of his early ones, and Matt, whatever the actor's name is, when you go to his Wikipedia, it says mostly known for playing this fucking sidekick idiot in The Public Enemy, and he had some other roles too, but them's the breaks. And he is more of a pretty boy, so it would have made sense for the time. But Cagney has more character and expression to him, and he's got the likable rogue and kind of a misfit feel to him that it just works.
Yeah, and then kind of going off of Cagney based his performance on Chicago gangster Dean O'Banion and two New York City hoodlums he had known as a kid. Further connection to the O'Banion reference is the bad guys in the film are led by Schemer Burns, which is an obvious reference to real life schemer Drucci, who was part of the North Side Gang. But that again, like these are people that are like still alive, and they're just kind of loosely referencing them in this gangster film. Now, I mean, I'm sure it's still like even today, if you're in like the mob or something, I'm sure they watch Sopranos and they're like, yeah, this is just like it is, or they got that way off. But you got to get a kick out of it if you're this guy and you're like, cool, they named a villain after me. That's awesome.
Well,
I'm the best.
well, yeah. Just like in The Sopranos, like you can't be a gangster without being affected by gangster films, and like because it feeds off each other. Much of the fascination comes from that, and the myth, like we said, that gets propped up by these films. So what's your overall judgment? Great film, must see. Everyone must see this with their eyes.
Well, I mean, I would say if you're into gangster films and you're into The Sopranos, which I assume you are, if you're listening to a Sopranos podcast 20 years after the show premiered, I would
Probably,
say
yeah.
it's definitely a must see if you're into that stuff, because especially with The Sopranos, I think you'll get a kick out of it. It's 84 minutes or something like that. So, I mean, I was a little concerned at first. I was like, oh no, is this going to be like, because a lot of movies are like long. I don't know if it's because they just like, we need to earn that nickel or whatever it was. I was a little concerned it was going to be long and drag a bit, but I feel like it goes pretty fast. And especially, I mean, there's some stuff that kind of goes nowhere because you get the sense that when they made movies, there's constant, a scene will fade out and then it fades into another scene. There's not this huge arc always going on because we have to hang out with the women characters who are evil in a weird way, because there's this subplot where Putty's girl like takes advantage of a drunk Tommy and get out of here. Oh, not Putty. I'm sorry. Because there's the other, it's like Polly or something like that.
Yeah, the boss.
Yeah, Patty.
Okay.
At first it was confusing me. I had to turn on the subtitles because obviously audio recording wasn't the best. So some of the stuff sounds muddled, and they're talking about Patty and Putty, and I'm trying to figure out who's who. But yeah, there's a moment where Patty's girl is like so taken by Tommy that even though he's wasted, she has to take advantage of him. Which I thought was going to come back somewhat in the end, and I guess you could read it maybe, but at the end, Patty's like, I'm going to hang it all up just for the good of Tommy. I just want them to
love this kid. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, speaking of how immensely attracted she suddenly was to him, let's talk about the attractiveness of these characters, Jim, like we always do. This lady who shows up where, Tommy's like, oh my god, this lady in the streets, I'm going to forget about my girlfriend. That's fine and all, he's a lovable rogue, etc. But I'm kind of like, yeah, another lady? Like, she's not super much more attractive than the other lady you got, but I guess to him, she's got that it to her. Like she's a weirdo like me, kind of. Is that what's going on?
It was a weird thing they were doing that because that's Jean Harlow, I believe. She plays Gwen, and not that I've seen a bunch of these movies, but I know that name, and I believe she's not even like credited in the movie. But because they play around with that, because then there's a later scene where the way Tommy's talking is that they haven't had sex, basically, and she's been stringing him along. And they kind of play her character up as this, like, temptress that knows the score in a way, but isn't giving in and is playing Tommy, but it never really goes anywhere.
And she's sorry to cut you off. I was just gonna say she's definitely credited. She's the second one they show in the credits at the start. So it's like
someone said uncredited. I don't know why I read that somewhere, but whatever.
Well, it's just that's the reason. It almost feels like she's in it just because we need to have this actress rather than this character. That's a little bit what it felt like, because he had the girlfriend character and then this other character was kind of, it's like that was some part of the Hollywood system where it was like, oh, we got to have these two girls in here.
I'm sorry, let me correct what I said. It's Mae Clark who's uncredited. She's uncredited as Kitty. She's the one that gets the grapefruit stuck in her face. I'm sorry, I mistaken that. But yeah, it's a weird, it does feel like she's credited in it because she's probably more of a name, especially at the time.
Yeah.
And that scene when they're talking about sex and kind of going heavy on the innuendo, I have to imagine was pretty risque for the time.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's obviously a big part of it as well, because it's like a provocative scene. And not that it's like nudity or it's this like graphic sex scene or anything, but from what I assume like film was, even pre-code, seems like it was a big deal what they were doing.
Yeah. So I just wanted to mention as well, there's the part where he's getting taken advantage of is when they're all sort of holed up, and when it got to that point, like whatever I may have said earlier, it's like I'm really like on the edge of my seat by then, because I'm so familiar as well from the Sopranos and stuff like that, where it's like things are slowly building, but then they're building fast, and then suddenly shit's serious and we can't leave the building unless there's three of us and we all got guns, and Patty, if that was his name, is like, give me your weapons so I know you will leave if you have your guns, because you're all reckless idiots. Give me your weapons. And then like, I don't know, that whole sequence was kind of interesting and something I feel like I've seen other versions of.
Yes. Yeah. It plays out nice. And going back to some of the comedy, like after that, when Tommy leaves and then, his friend gets killed and he's looking for revenge, when he goes to the gun store and when the guy keeps turning around to show him a gun, he has to point the gun away from him. Like, it's just like a funny little move that he has to do twice, because even the gun store owner is so dumb about guns that he's like excited. Like, this is a 38. And he's like, oh, okay. And he pushes it away. And then it's also just a great gag the way he robs it, because he loads the gun there in front of him. And then he's like, stick him up. See? And then I swear like the store owner gives almost like a Jim Halpert office look to the camera, like as he's being robbed for the guns. So I'm calling it. Office is heavily influenced by the Public Enemy.
Yes, it reaches deep, this film, and many references throughout filmic history. Now he definitely does like a laugh when that happens, and that's kind of great. But before I forget, I did want to mention we always tell our dear listeners that you can send feedback to showswhatyouknowshow@gmail.com. We did get an email from Spencer, who wrote in saying that he just wants to send some random thoughts about season 2. The season actually is my favorite, if you exclude 6B. This is all code to me, but I guess that's the last part of the last season. You know, I remember they split it up and whatever. I know it's not as intense as other seasons, but I find myself looking forward to it every rewatch, more than any other season, again, except 6B. In season 2, they really started experimenting with more standalone-ish episodes, which is one of the things that keeps me watching the show over and over. Commendatory, D-Girl, The Happy Wanderer, Girls Don't Cry, etc. And then he says season 3 was amazing too, of course. I think it kind of depends on your personal preference for character arcs. Jackie Jr.'s story is entertaining enough, but it never hit me the same way as the arcs of Big Pussy and Richie. To me, season 3 is all about, and then he says 3 characters that he thinks season 3 is all about. It's definitely not a spoiler. Should I say it? Doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I should even be reading this, but
I actually glanced through it to make sure there's nothing in there. Yeah, I shouldn't, but yes. So I'm not saying season 2 is objectively superior. It's just my jam for whatever reason. I think it depends how each character hits each viewer because they're so fully developed and realistic. Season 2 is also relatively light compared to 3 and on. Maybe I shouldn't be reading this. And as I watch this show more, I appreciate the slower episodes more and discover comedy I didn't notice before, like you mentioned, Jim. So maybe that has something to do with the type of Sopranos fan I am. Not sure. And he says, stoked for season 3, solid choice on Public Enemy for the companion film. I haven't seen it, but I know it's David Chase's favorite movie in addition to playing a huge part in season 3. So there's a lot to bite into. Keep up the good work. This email is rambly, off the cuff, blah, blah. He says, pick out anything that stands out. I just read it verbatim. There you go, Spencer.
Yeah. And I mean, going back over it, no, it's fine. I mean, basically the only thing really, it's not a spoiler. I mean, Jackie Jr. was introduced at the end of season 2. You're just going to see more of Jackie Jr., which I guess can be assumed because the other Apriles that we know, Jackie and Richie, are out of the picture, and we were introduced to this character. So we'll just go from there. We did get another email as well, which we didn't get a chance to read. I could read that as well.
Yeah.
3-month listener, first-time emailer for the past 2.5 years. This is from Rafi Cooper, by the way. For the past 2.5 years, The Sopranos has been not only my favorite show of all time, but also holds its own against pretty much any film or film franchise I can think of. And your discussions are super insightful, and listening to them is always a highlight of my week. The Sopranos prequel, The Many Saints of Newark, has just headed slightly closer to production as they selected a director, Alan Taylor, a veteran of many shows, including some of the best episodes of Sopranos, but only one of which you've reviewed so far, Pax Soprana. Don't look ahead, Jacob.
I won't.
I remember that a few weeks ago, you guys wondered if multiple episodes of a TV show can get nominated for writing in one Emmy ceremony, and the answer is yes, indeed. In fact, unsurprisingly, The Sopranos had multiple years where they took up 3 or 4 out of the 5 nods for Best Dramatic Writing. You guys have talked about spotting actors who you know from other shows or movies. Well, currently in the midst of my 3rd watch of this series, I noticed Samir, one of the main characters from Mike Judge's Office Space, within the crowd at Christopher's acting class in Big Girls Don't Cry, and wonder how I never noticed him before as one of my favorite comedies. Yes, he is the he's in Chris's team, I believe, from the dude from Office Space.
Yeah.
I just binge watched season 1 of Cobra Kai and love to hear your guys' thoughts on it, as it's surprisingly great. I do agree with that, and we do need to do. I know we're kind of late passing on it, but we have to talk about Cobra Kai.
We just keep mentioning how we need to do it, and then we talk about Sopranos every week. I mean, not that Sopranos would get interrupted. We're just trying to fit it in because we've had The Handmaid's Tale, we have Westworld, and at this point I need to rewatch Cobra Kai, but I don't mind because I watched it quite a while ago now, and like you said, I was surprised by how great it was.
Yeah. And last thing here, thanks for reviewing Spaced a while back because it reminded me how genius it is and caused me to rewatch it. Keep up the good work. So yeah, a couple great emails. Really appreciate that. And we'd love to hear your thoughts, whether it be on Public Enemy, because I think there's still some more to dive into, especially as we get into season 3 and in, of course, Sopranos or any other show you're digging right now.
Yeah, I will say I was trying as I was watching the movie. I was like, how are they going to play this in The Sopranos? Like, what scenes are going to show up? I don't remember my exact thoughts, but there were a couple of points where I was like, I bet we're going to see this part. Like, I bet we're going to see that part. Probably something in the rain. And I was thinking, like, oh, it can't be something like just if you have to be able to tell it's a gangster movie. But then I just heard the clip at the beginning where he just comes in, Tony, like Mr. Exposition, like, oh, this old gangster classic, I love it. Yeah, great movie. They can definitely use whatever they like. I expect to see something from the rain, maybe him falling over at the end. Of course, you mentioned the mother, so I expect that. I will say, when he was there at the end of the film, just through knowing drama, I knew it wasn't going to be good at the end, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
But I couldn't tell that he was supposed to be dead, and then he fell over, and then it was like, the fate of this character is blah blah, like the title card, and I was like, was he supposed to be dead? I checked Wikipedia, like, oh yeah, he's dead. Okay.
Oh yeah, he died.
Yep, he's dead there. He dead. But yes, and also as the latest email mentioned, we do discuss other television shows. If you only follow our Sopranos coverage, please do check out showswhatyouknow.com, where you could always leave a review on the Shows What You Know feed. Tell us what show you would like us to check into, and we'll try to fit it in between all the Sopranos. We do have some time. We're trying to kill in between episodes here, because The Handmaid's Tale's wrapping up. So is Westworld's already done. It's like, what are we supposed to do with all this time, Jim?
Well, I mean, we should have some things on the horizon. If you Sopranos fans are into Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, we should be discussing the new season of Better Call Saul at our It's All Good Man podcast.
Yes.
And we will be discussing the new Hulu show Castle Rock at, I believe, Entering Castle Rock. You'll see it. It's on our website.
Don't blame us. We have so many shows, you guys. It's hard to keep up with them. But yes, Castle Rock, the new Stephen King show, basically the Stephen King multiverse show, or cinematic universe show. We've got high hopes, and we're gonna see whether they pan out. I mean, that's the worry with new shows. You never know if it's gonna pan out. That's why I always appreciate sitting down and watching an episode of The Sopranos, because I already have it guaranteed by people telling me for 20 years, oh, you need to watch The Sopranos, you need to watch this. I already know it's gonna be good. It's a relaxing experience for me.
Yes, yeah, and I guess that about does. I guess the last thing then I would ask, as far as your opinion, Public Enemy must watch.
It's. I mean, yeah, like you said, if you're into this, if you have already seen the classics, I mean, this is a classic. That sounded like an insult. But I don't know. I'm like The Godfather is a must see. Public Enemy is like something you watch and you're like, holy shit, all this started here. It's not necessarily in itself going to be like a mind-blowing film, but it is like a lot of stuff when you dig into the basis of film, like the first few ones. It didn't necessarily hit me super hard, like emotionally by itself, but it was like, wow, this is fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and welcome aboard, people, as we're about to get into season 3. We'll be back next week with episode 1 of season 3, Mr. Ruggiero's Neighborhood. So,
yay, finally. Like, I mean, again, I'll just mention, I did move to another country, so that's why we've had a slight break here, and I've not watched an episode of The Sopranos in probably longer than since before we started doing this show, so I'm really antsy to get back into it and get you that coverage. But Jim, there's just one more thing.
oh, what's that?
Cut to black.